Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out. This is the third annual Wisconsin Manufacturing Report. We're so glad you're here. We're excited about this. We're very proud of the product. Most of the time when you see these reports, you're talking about someone who generally sends out a survey to their friends and says, go on my website, answer the questionnaire. You get 100 responses and then they extrapolate it to the universe. We take a very different approach and we're very proud of the way that we do this. We have 415 interviews, 20-minute interviews with manufacturing executives throughout the state. We use that data to inform 5 focus groups spread around the state where we get some background to the data and are really able to come up with some insights. And so I hope you enjoy what we've put out there today and really come away with some new understanding of the challenges that manufacturers face in this environment. So we can't do this without sponsors, and so the sponsor for the Wisconsin Manufacturing Report is First Business Bank. I'd like to invite Brian Swanson up.
Thanks, Buck. Good afternoon, everyone. As Buck suggested or stated, I'm Brian Swanson with First Business Bank. I lead commercial banking in the greater Milwaukee market. First Business Bank, who we are, for those that don't know us, we're a 30-year plus financial institution headquartered in the Madison market. We focus 100% of our efforts on commercial banking, largely in the greater Milwaukee, Madison, and Fox Valley markets. We're about $3 billion in assets, and we focus on not only conventional commercial banking, which is my space, but we also have an SBA team, ABL, equipment financing, and factoring team. So we are proud to be the only presenting sponsor in the 3 years of the survey. And before I turn it back over to Buck and Rob, I just want to touch on a few things. One, how critical manufacturing is in the state of Wisconsin. Second, the role of the survey in that sector, and then how First Business Bank aligns well in the space. So I think most know why, but why is manufacturing so critical in Wisconsin? Because it represents such a large piece of the overall economic pie, right? Wisconsin remains, in spite of everything you hear of the shrink of manufacturing in Wisconsin, remains the number 9 state in total job employment in the manufacturing space, but more importantly, number 1 on a per capita basis. So as goes the manufacturing sector, so goes the Wisconsin economy. This survey, we think, can help a lot to help be a critical driver in the guidance of leaders in their respective businesses so that they can compete and succeed in these uncertain times, which I think you'll see in the readout here. If the degree of uncertainty was high last year, it's even higher yet this year. So with that degree of uncertainty, certainly your advisory relationships are more important than ever, and hopefully that includes your banking relationships. So why are we different? Why is First Business Bank different? Why does our value proposition resonate in these times? It's really 3 things: consistent approach. We manage on a customer level, not on the portfolio level. And what that really translates to is we're large enough to offer the breadth of services that lower middle market companies need, but we're small enough to manage on that individual relationship level. We offer tailored solutions, and if we do this right, and I mean tailored solutions, we're listening to you, then we're providing you with the capital to sustain and grow your business, but not getting in the way of you running your business. And the last thing is that because we're headquartered here, the decision makers are in market. So we understand the space, we understand the market, and that translates well. Over the last 2 years, we've grown 25% year over year in market. And that's significant because if you look at the banking sector in total, banks can only really grow as a sector with GDP, which has been low as of late. In the last 2 years, it's averaged about 2.1%. And then lastly, I would just say that our Net Promoter Score, which is a measure of our customers' likelihood to recommend us to others, is at 80, and the banking sector average is 23. 80 is kind of the threshold for what Bain, which is the NPS benchmarker for financial services, would say is a world-class service provider. So we like to think that we provide that, and it's been validated with our Net Promoter Score. So if you want to talk to us, look us up. There's a few bankers in the room, so shake their hand. And with that, enough about us, and I'll turn it back over to Buck. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. You really made this possible over the last 3 years, and we really appreciate the partnership that we've built with First Business. So before I bring the stats guy up here, I wanted to just highlight a few of the things that we saw as being really important in this study, and give you some things to really think about as we're going forward. I mean, the first thing is workforce, right? It's still the elephant in the room. It's the big gorilla issue that we're all trying to tackle and all coming up with solutions so that we can keep growing with a limited number of people. I can't even read the writing. Oh, so we're just, and it's changing the way that we're approaching this, right? There are more concerns around workforce, more concerns about the way that we're really looking at how do we retain workers, and then manufacturers are retaining workers longer, which is having a widespread effect across the economy. Number 3 is we're seeing an increased ability to grow. When we were talking about this last year, manufacturers were so busy they could barely breathe. And we're seeing some of that slow down a bit, and that's giving more manufacturers the reason to go out and look for new customers and new opportunities. They're an optimistic group, question mark. Still a little bit pessimistic about the economy overall, but very optimistic about their own operations. And then finally, dealing with technology, right? How do we use technology to really keep growing? And then the advanced technology that's coming out, how are we experimenting with it and figuring out how that really makes a difference for individual operations? And right along with that is how do we stay safe? With the new technology, with new exposures, there's also the opportunity for new risks as well. So those are the umbrella issues that you'll see play out in the course of the report. And I'm going to turn it over to Rob from Meeting Street, who's been doing this for us now for 3 years and for the state of Minnesota for 14. So a lot of in-depth experience. So here you go, Rob.
Thank you, Buckley. Appreciate it. Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everybody coming, even though I hear there's a little bit of a baseball game maybe today. As Buckley noted, I just want to real quickly set the stage in terms of what it is we did here. Because Buckley was slightly wrong. It was a 22-minute survey. Every manufacturing executive we got on the phone sat with us for on average for about 22 minutes, answering, as you will see, a ton of questions to give us a ton of insights. We interviewed 415 manufacturing executives, 3rd year in a row we've done this. In addition to that, we also did a series of focus groups across the state. We have those down there in the early part of September. And so you've got a lot of data to kind of pour through here. One of the things that we take great pains in setting up and organizing is to ensure that this sample is representative of the manufacturing community in the state. And so we are pretty stringent on terms of quotas of who we talk to, both in terms of employee size, manufacturer, the type of manufacturer, where they're located, using stats to make sure this is representative of the community at large. Now, before I get into this, I thought it would be helpful for us to kind of get a little bit of a recap of what we found out last year, because I do think it helps sets the stage a little bit for what we've learned this year and what's changed. As you may recall, for those of you who saw the last year's presentation, we had a high percentage of manufacturers who felt we were in the midst of a recession last year. In fact, when you combine that with the percentage who believe the economy was slowing down, it's essentially 50% of manufacturers, half of all manufacturers, felt the economy was either slowing down or in a recession. So high level of pessimism about the broader economy. It was clearly impacting how they see their businesses too. We asked specifically about three metrics: gross revenues, profitability, and capital expenditures. And manufacturers were telling us that they expected smaller increases in all three of those than they have in the years past. The concerns that were really top of mind for manufacturers last year: inflation, rising energy costs, also some lingering concerns about supply chains as well. As one person mentioned in our focus groups, when it comes to getting bids and quotes, they can change in a matter of hours. So these are merely just estimates. It's hard for me to price things out with our clients because of the pricing changing so rapidly. I think one of the big surprises, at least from my perspective last year, was the significant impact that COVID-19 was still having on manufacturers. 71% of manufacturers a year ago said it was having a major or significant impact on their business. And 17% of manufacturers said they have not recovered at all from the pandemic last year. And that kind of leads us to the last point, that when you look at various different metrics a year ago, we found somewhere between 10 to 20% of manufacturers who were telling us they were really struggling to make ends meet and to keep their business afloat. So that was a year ago. Let's get into what we found out this year. And you'll see in a lot of this data set, some of the key stats haven't really moved and changed a lot. And this is a really good indicator of that. We kind of start at the 30,000-foot level. Generally speaking, would you say that Wisconsin's business climate is heading in the right direction? That's the blue bar, or off on the wrong track, which is the red bar. Those numbers have been pretty consistent over the 3 years that we've been doing this survey. This year, 51% of executives felt the business climate was generally heading in the right direction. A little more than a third was off on the wrong track. Those numbers haven't really changed over the last year. Now, that's the business climate. When you ask specifically about the economy, we see a lot more volatility in this data. And let me just take you back to 2001, the first year we did this, where you had a plurality who believed we were in a year of economic expansion, that the economy was growing. A year after that, in 2022, that number was almost cut in half. Only 22% believed we were in a year, or 20% believed we were in a year of economic expansion. You look at that dark red bar, which is the recession percentage. A year ago, 28% believed we were in a recession. 23% believed we were in, 22% believed the economy was slowing down. So 50% believed we were in an economic slowdown period a year ago. This year, it's down to 38%. So a noticeable drop in concerns about inflation. But those folks aren't necessarily moving over to a growing economy. In fact, that growing number hasn't really moved over the past year. What we instead see is a sense of uncertainty or stagnation, where folks believe the economy is mostly flat. That's where a plurality of manufacturers are today. I think one of the other, going back now to consistent data, and we've seen this for all 3 years. I was telling Buckley and Joy Len, when you look at the Minnesota manufacturing data over a 14-year period, and our first survey in Minnesota was done in December of 2008, when a lot of companies had reasons not to be confident. Manufacturing confidence has never really waned. I think at the lowest point we ever saw was 81% in Minnesota. And here we see a very similar trend. Despite what's going on, big picture, Wisconsin manufacturers are pretty confident that from a financial perspective about the future of their firm. These numbers haven't moved over 3 years, and if you look at the percent very confident too, pretty high numbers here. When you look at the data, one of the things we see a little bit different here is the change among bigger manufacturers. Those numbers have dropped a little bit in terms of the percent very confident compared to where they were a year ago. Larger manufacturers, by and large, though, are still a little more confident than the smaller manufacturers, those under 50 employees. I mentioned the key business metrics at the very beginning, and last year we saw a noticeable dip from 2021 to 2022. In some of these key business metrics, we also see a decline this year as well. And I tend to focus just on the percent who are expecting to see increases in terms of gross revenues from 2022. It's down 6 points over the last 12 months. Profitability has stayed about the same or stayed exactly the same over the past year. Capital expenditures, we also see a little bit of dip there in terms of expected increases. If you look at the profitability in 2023, though, this is the first time we've seen more manufacturers expecting to see a decrease in their profitability than an increase by a very slim margin, within the margin of error, but that's still a pretty telling stat. So in terms of these business metrics, the numbers aren't as good this year as we've seen in the past too. All right, this is a little bit of an eye chart here. Lot of data. Let me kind of boil this down if I can. There's a couple of places where we've seen noticeable changes in terms of the priorities of manufacturers. So this series here is a 1 to 10 scale, and what we're specifically looking at are the 9s and 10s, those who say these issues are very important to them and their firm. Let's look at the ones that have changed a little bit. Cost of materials, availability, supply of materials. Both of those we've seen noticeable drops. I'm kind of guessing here because I can't really see my own data, but that's right. Those are the ones where we've seen the biggest drops over the last year. The ones where we've seen increases in concern, the cost of healthcare coverage. That's up noticeably from where it was a year ago. And finding new customers and markets. Another one where we've seen a noticeable increase. Those are the ones where we've seen the changes. I think at the top of the list, go to there, what's been pretty consistent, at least in the top 4 of most important issues, are workforce-related issues. So still at the top here, keeping qualified workers, finding and attracting qualified workers, employees. Those are the top 2 issues this year. They've been consistently at the top of the list. Not as much change over the past year compared to some of the other concerns. Okay. You see this in a lot of places in the data in terms of workforce concerns as an issue. Finding quality and skilled people is at the top of this list. Now, this question is a little bit different. Instead of us giving them the issues and asking them to rate the importance, here we ask in an open-ended format on the phone, what are the main issues or concerns affecting your business and its success? So it's an open-ended format. They can give us anything. We go back to these responses, code them and group them together, and you can see here workforce issues clearly is the top one. And it's driven by both smaller manufacturers, those under 50 employees, and larger manufacturers as well, but noticeably higher percentages among manufacturers that have more than 50 employees. It's also noticeably higher with manufacturers have over 5 million annually in revenue. Smaller manufacturers still put workforce concerns at the top. They tend to be a little more concerned, though, about inflation and rising costs than the larger manufacturers do. So both in a closed-ended format and in an open-ended format, workforce issues tend to rise to the top this year. Speaking of workforce, we ask manufacturers, are you currently hiring? 55% of manufacturers say they are, a stat that's been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. The vast majority of those who are hiring tend to hire between 1 and 5 positions. It's about 3/4 of manufacturers. Only a quarter of manufacturers are hiring 6 or more employees right now, or looking for 6 or more employees. We've been asking this and tracking this over the last 3 years. How difficult or easy is it to find workers you need for your positions? And as you can see, consistently, that percent difficult, the very and the somewhat combined, which is at 81%, has been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. It was 84% a year ago, 83% 2 years ago. What has shifted a little bit is that top layer there, the percent very difficult. We've seen that number drop over the last 3 years consistently. In 2001, it was 57% who said it was very difficult to find the workers they need. Last year, it was 48%. This year, it's down to 44%. That's a pretty significant decline. Over a 3-year period, 13-point drop in very difficult is a noticeable finding. And when we went back and looked at the data, we were curious, where is this change happening? And it's, first of all, it's happening with both smaller employee size firms and larger employee size firms. But the drop-off certainly over the last 2 years has been greater among the larger manufacturers, those with more than 50 employees. It's down to 43% now, at parity with those smaller firms. So the last 2 years, we've been talking about how larger manufacturers were more concerned about workforce issues. We're more likely to say it was very difficult to find the workers they need. Now they're at parity with the smaller manufacturers, at least on this particular metric. Okay. Is your company considering any of the following changes to address some of the long-term workforce issues? At the top of the list, the things that manufacturers say they're doing, increasing wages and salaries. 60% of manufacturers say they're doing that. It's down a couple of points from where it was a year ago. Next to that list is raising prices. That is one where a year ago we saw quite a few manufacturers said they were doing that to address long-term workforce issues. This year, that's been noticeably lower. It's 20 points, down 20 points this year from where it was a year ago. I believe last year it was the highest rated one. So we've seen a noticeable drop off there, but increasing wages and salary is the one thing that most manufacturers say they're doing to address this. Here again, another eye chart, but the important thing to kind of take away here is the shading. So that same question, we looked at it by company size and by revenue. And we shaded the boxes here where a majority of manufacturers in that particular demo say they're doing this or considering this. And what's really clear is if you look at those who are the smaller manufacturers, those under 50 employees, the one thing that a majority of them are doing are increasing wages and salaries. But that's the only thing they're doing, a majority of them. Whereas you look at the larger manufacturers, there are 5 things that a majority of manufacturers, larger manufacturers, are doing to address this issue. You see the same kind of trend in terms of revenue, the under $1 million in revenue, not a single thing that a majority are doing, but those 5 million plus in revenue, 5 things they're focused on. Smaller manufacturers purely focused on raising wages and salaries, whereas the larger manufacturers tend to be doing more to try to address some of their long-term workforce issues. Two other questions we kind of put on the same slide because this data has been really consistent over 3 years. On the left-hand side, are your wages going up? 61% of manufacturers say they are. Pretty consistent finding over 3 years. On the right-hand side, do you expect the benefits you provide your employees to increase, decrease, stay about the same? The increase percentage hasn't really moved. It's moved a little bit, but the vast majority of manufacturers are telling us employee benefits are largely staying the same this year. So wages going up, employee benefits largely staying the same. Okay. Next, we ask manufacturers, what is it you want your employees to know about your company? What's kind of your selling point to prospective employees? And here again, another place where salary and wages, we find it at the top of the list. It's down a few points from where it was a year ago, but it is still the number one thing the companies say they want to be known for. You've got work environment in there, flexible shifts, work schedules, work-life balance, all getting very similar percentages. I mean, there's not much difference between number 1 and number 4. Those are the 4 main things there, but salary and wages are at the top of the list. Shifting a little bit of a different direction here, we asked if manufacturers are providing health insurance to their employees. 63% of manufacturers say they are. That number is consistent with what we saw a year ago. We also asked them, among those who are providing health insurance, do you expect the cost of your health insurance to go up or go down or stay about the same? A whopping 1% expected their health insurance costs to go down. The vast majority, 73%, expected healthcare costs to go up. Again, consistent data with what we saw a year ago. We ask about potential areas for increased investment, and we gave them these different lists here of options. And there were three that were really kind of at the top here. Let me see if I get here. Growing revenue and profitability, expanding sales within the United States, and maximizing productivity. Those were the top three. Those have been the top three in all 3 years. You've got a couple more here that are in the majority. I think one of the real kind of takeaways too, despite the fact that those are the top of the list, if you look at the far right column, which is the change from where we were a year ago, all of these are down, with the exception of one, are down from where they were a year ago, in some cases by double digits. A real sense, I think, between this and what we've kind of heard in the focus groups, that a lot of these manufacturers may be taking a step back in terms of investments this year as opposed to what we heard last year or the year before. Can we save it to the end? Thank you. Otherwise, yeah. Shifting to AI. This is a new topic that we hadn't touched on. We asked specifically, is your company considering, or is it currently using artificial intelligence, considering using it? And kind of a multi-pronged approach here. We found 10% of manufacturers who said they're currently using AI, 10%. We found 7% who said they're considering it within the next year or so. Another 9% who said they're considering it within the next 2 to 5 years. So when we combine those who are either using it or considering using it, we get about a quarter of manufacturers, 26%. 72% of manufacturers say they do not use it and are not considering using it anytime soon. At the same time, we asked them how important, right, automation. How important is automation to their company's future? 64% when it comes to automation believe it's important. Little more than a quarter believe it's very important, a number that's been pretty consistent over the 2 years that we've asked it, up a little bit from last year. Where automation, we have seen a little bit of a shift, is by type of manufacturer. Consistently, automation has been high with your larger manufacturers, and that remains to be the case. Those with more than 50 employees noticeably higher than those under 50 employees. But we went back and looked at the 2001 data, and we do see kind of a steady increase, not by a lot, but by a little with manufacturers who have fewer than 50 employees. All right, now shifting back to AI. We wanted to get kind of a sense of what do manufacturers think about AI. And so we gave them these 3 approaches. One, that AI is not going to have much of a real impact on businesses like mine, which is where a majority of manufacturers, 51% said today. 40% mentioned that AI, or select that AI is an important tool, but it's one of many tools that I would kind of use, or technologies that I would use. Only 5% of manufacturing executives that we spoke with said it's going to fundamentally change businesses like theirs. Which I was, to be honest, pretty surprised that that number wasn't higher, given all the attention and focus on AI in general. Only 5% of manufacturers said it's going to fundamentally change the business. When we looked at this data by type of manufacturer, there were a few differences, whereas smaller manufacturers were much more in the camp that it's not really going to have an impact on businesses like mine, Larger manufacturers were more in the camp that it's one of many tools that I'll use. But even the larger manufacturers, or those with more than 5 million annually in revenue, only 8% of them said it was going to fundamentally change their business. So while there's some differences, it's more with the blue and yellow pies. The red pie doesn't really move much by type of manufacturer. Okay. What are some of the biggest obstacles to automation in your company? The big thing is budgeting and financing. That's what folks told us. 32% said that's their biggest obstacle. Training and system obstacles, also technology obstacles kind of fall secondary to that, but the big thing is budget and financing that's preventing them from automation. Another topic that we hit on, data hacking, and we've asked this over the last 3 years. We found that 22% of manufacturers said they've been hacked or experienced a data breach of some kind. That number has slightly increased over the 3 years that we've asked it. In 2021, it was at 16%. Last year it was 18%. It's up to 22%. Where I think this data is really fascinating is when you look at it by size of manufacturer, particularly those with 50 employees plus. That number's gone from 17% in 2021 to 34% last year to 39% this year. The numbers are pretty flat with smaller manufacturers, but a noticeable increase over 3 years with your larger manufacturers, those with more than 50 employees. All right, so 22% of manufacturers said they've experienced a data breach of some kind. The vast majority, nearly 9 out of 10, say they're confident, though, that their company is secure from hacking. And even the very confidence number is up from where it was in the previous 2 years. This data is really flat when you look at it, be their type of manufacturer, where the manufacturer is located, how often they've been in business, their employee size, their revenue size. We do see a little bit more confidence in those manufacturers who have not experienced a data breach. 90% of them are confident that their company is secure, but really, really high numbers and high levels of confidence. Okay. In terms of, most important drivers, I know this is what happens when you get old. More important drivers of the company's future growth. Buckley mentioned this, something we saw kind of pop a little more this year, and certainly we heard a lot about this in the focus groups, is finding new customers and markets. That is the biggest driver of future growth at 63%. It's been at the top of this list over the previous 2 years, but it's at its highest percentage over the 3 years that we've tested. It's up 5 points from where it was a year ago. That's what a lot of companies are telling us is their main source of growth in the future. Formal strategic plan, a question we've been tracking, and the data here has bounced around a little bit. Last year we saw a little bump up in the percentage of companies who said they have a formal strategic plan for growth. This year we see that number drop, but manufacturers are pretty evenly split, or very evenly split, in terms of whether they have a plan or not. There is a noticeable difference you can see by type of manufacturer. The larger manufacturers, not surprisingly, are much more likely to have a formal strategic plan for profitable growth than those less than 50 employees and those under $1 million in revenue. Despite the fact of whether they have a plan or not, manufacturers are pretty adamant that it's important. It's important to their company's future growth. 67% of manufacturers say having a formal strategic plan is important to their company's future growth. And that number has been pretty consistent over 3 years. What I love about this chart here is the far right here. Even those 49% of manufacturers who don't have a plan, 39%, nearly 4 out of 10 of them say having a plan is important to their company's future growth, even though they don't have one. Couple of more questions. This is a new one. And one of the things we wanted to kind of touch on a little bit was sustainability issues. And we asked specifically 2 questions here. First time we've asked these, weren't really sure kind of the response we were going to get, but let me walk you through it. On the far left-hand side is your company facing material risk within the state in any of these areas. One thing is for certain on this, right? Water risk is not really an issue at all for manufacturers. You can see the risk there is, the percentage is extremely low. A little bit, a quarter mentioned energy risk. The vast majority, though, don't really face any of these risks. Even on the right-hand side, when we ask, are you facing any of these material risks within your supply chain, we don't see much difference here either. The vast majority, 72%, say they're not really facing any of these risks right now. And then finally, where do you see as potential increases in prospective business? This is an open-ended question, so they can give us any place in the world. And 8 out of 10 manufacturers, 78% mentioned the United States, kind of on par with what we saw a year ago. Next biggest is Canada, Mexico, Europe, and then it's spread out all across the globe. But the United States is continuously seen as the overwhelming area of opportunity for prospective business. So I've got some bottom line thoughts here and then kick it over to Buckley, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. But I know we just poured through a lot of data here, but I think in comparing to where we started or where we were last year, where we ended, I think there's been a little bit of decrease in terms of the direction the economy is going. If you remember, 50% of manufacturers a year ago thought we were either in a recession or the economy was slowing down. That number's down 12 points this year. At the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty about the economy in a sense that it's mostly flat. Economic expansion in a sense that the economy is growing hasn't really changed over the last year. I think for the second year in a row, we see this slight downward trend in terms of key business projectives, specifically focusing on projected increases in gross revenues and capital expenditures. Those percentages are down for the second year in a row. And profitability is holding steady, but we also see a little bit of an uptick in the number of companies who are expecting decreases in profitability. And when you look at this data demographically, it certainly appears that larger manufacturers are less bullish now than what we saw in 2002 or even in 2001 on those key business metrics. The concerns we heard a year ago, inflation, material cost, availability, supply issues, have diminished a little bit. They're still important, but not at the top of the list as we saw a year ago. Healthcare costs and finding new customers and markets have seen a little bit of an increase in concern and importance with manufacturers. But at the top of the list are workforce issues. And for the 3 years we've been doing that, that's been a pretty consistent finding. We continuously see manufacturers struggle to find the workers that they need. I'm really intrigued to see next year what happens with that percent. Very difficult. That's something that a lot of manufacturers have been saying over year. It's noticeably lower this year. It'd be interesting to see if that continues to hold. Yeah. Automation, yes. Automation investment is down this year. One of the things we didn't talk about, but if you look at the top concerns and investment areas, automation is down a little bit here. They still say it's important. We talk a little bit about hacking. Right, 22% have experienced a data breach or hacking of some kind. It is interesting, they're still confident that they can withstand it, that their company is secure. The larger companies, though, are clearly the ones that are feeling the brunt of this. Smaller manufacturers, in terms of percentage who have experienced a data breach, hasn't really changed over the last 2 years. And then AI, I was expecting this number in interest to be a little bit higher than it was, but only 5% of manufacturers think it's going to fundamentally change their business. A majority say it's not really going to have an impact at all on their companies. Buckley?
All right, thank you for that, Rob. And now, just taking all of that data and trying to distill down to what we think is most important for manufacturers right now. And there are 4 takeaways. 2 of them come straight out of last year. I mean, we really see this workforce shortage as changing the structure of manufacturing. And what we see is larger companies are having more trouble finding employees than smaller companies. And as a result, they have the wherewithal and the expertise to lean into technology. And they're using that, and they're getting what they expect out of it, right? They're getting higher throughput, and the costs are going down. But they're also seeing something else. They're seeing that now they're looking at that cost of that part, and they're saying, oh, I was contracting this out to you. I can do it for the same cost in-house. Oh, and I control the quality and I control the schedule. If you're one of these suppliers, you don't have a chance. There isn't a price you can offer these manufacturers to keep that share of business. And we think a lot of manufacturers are just plain going to miss this. And we're seeing a real structural change with this as the technology improves and as the leaders continue to implement more of it. The second thing is that we continue to see a large number of manufacturers under stress. These numbers have been consistent in almost any survey that we've done since the beginning of the pandemic. And this 20%-ish of manufacturers, if they're struggling now in a period that is actually fairly strong for manufacturers, they could be in real trouble as we move forward or have a slight downturn. And we don't see the manufacturing going away, but there could be manufacturers going away. Then there's this whole area of how the workforce is changing, right? I mean, we're seeing manufacturers being very reluctant to let workers go. So, traditionally scale up for the peaks, scale down for the valleys. Now, not so much. Manufacturers are beginning to say, okay, I understand the cost of letting someone go and then trying to bring them back in, let alone good luck finding someone who can fill that role once you've let them go. So they're making investments in these folks. Making investments in upskilling, making investments in development, making investments just in keeping them in their job, right? And we're seeing a change in the way that they're approaching this upskilling, right? They don't want to send people to a campus. I think this is going to be a real change for educators. If a manufacturer sends somebody to a campus, they only see 2 things bad happening. One is that they're not getting their work out the door. They need the employee on the line. And then number 2 is they're exposed to poaching. Where we see this changing, and when I talk to technical colleges about this, they say, oh, no problem. We'll come in, we'll do the training on site. Well, there is a problem. These skills are relatively specific to the equipment and the manufacturer. And while these manufacturers are very happy to foot their part of the bill, they don't have the wherewithal to build a whole new curriculum. So this is going to be a challenge for some of our educational partners in saying, okay, how do I build consortia to be able to provide these skills in a way that manufacturers can actually use them and really strengthen their workforce? It's also interesting how the stickiness of employees staying with employers is keeping us, making a recession less likely. We were talking with a group of economists from across the Midwest last week, and they all agree that's almost impossible to go into a recession when you're sitting at 3% unemployment. And if manufacturers aren't letting employees go back into the market, that number is likely to stay high. So we're seeing that as really an impact that can be had across the economy. And so the workforce shortage has kept us from overshooting the demand mark, right? Making more than we could. The supply chain has also been the same way. We weren't able to get the materials or the labor we needed to meet all of the demand. It was pushed off. So if we were able to do that, we'd be in the normal cycle, right? We'd all have warehouses full of goods that we were trying to work down. And that hasn't happened with this period of upswing. And so that's what we see really in this, in the workforce area here in terms of what's changing with manufacturers. We absolutely think the survey data is showing a blind spot for manufacturers. We don't talk to anybody who's involved with AI who doesn't think it's going to transform not just manufacturing, but business in general. You know, this is really the first time in my career that we have a technology that's going to be a white-collar productivity instrument. And so people now where this is being most effectively used is in places that we would generally think, geez, it's a knowledge worker, we need that person there. And what we're finding is that those manufacturers that were using that, when we asked them in the focus groups, they said, well, where we're using it right now is with job descriptions and with policy manuals, and they're really getting their feet wet around that. But think about, you know, the jobs that affects. So we think that this could be a real huge blind spot for most of the manufacturers in the state. And so, you know, the need to educate manufacturers about AI and what it can do, and then helping them implement it in a way that makes sense and keeps them safe. You know, it also raises the cybersecurity issues, and we just think that's a huge blind spot as well. You know, and where you see that as the difference between companies that have been hacked and those that haven't. You know, the companies that haven't been hacked are, you know, saying, well, it doesn't affect me. But you see their confidence really get shaken once somebody's penetrated their defenses and really gotten in and affected their operations. So these are two areas where I think there's a lot of work to be done, and where manufacturers really have a pretty big blind sight. So what do? So we're saying get three overall things that are pretty high level. The first thing is embrace this new workforce marketplace, right? You know, it's really more critical than ever that you have an employment brand. You know why people should come to work for you as opposed to someone down the street. If you don't do that, you're operating at a disadvantage, and you probably won't see the best employees coming to your place. We've also been reminded in this process, as particularly through the focus groups, that development isn't just vertical, right? It isn't just moving to that next position, it's horizontal as well. So we want to keep frontmost in our mind that we want to be developing employees, but that can be out to the sides as well. So let's just use AI as an example. There's someone in your shop who's interested in AI, you know, let them pursue it. Get them the training that they need so that they can develop a little bit of expertise, and then give them a well-defined assignment on implementing AI within the building. It builds benefits both ways. Can't emphasize enough leaning into technology. This is just, we're seeing it change the manufacturing floor. I think we're going to see it change the front office in ways that we can only imagine right now. Make sure that you're leaning into it. I think one of the things we've found in our work with the Transformational Productivity Initiative is just the importance of having a roadmap. You know, and that roadmap isn't generic. You know, it needs to be specific to your company, so you know, here's where I'm going to get that return quickly from the investments that I make in both time and talent. So time, talent, and treasure, right? So lean into technology, but remember to stay safe. The cyber concerns are critical. There are new concerns now with AI. You know, if you're using AI out on a public model, now all of a sudden your IP is out in the wild. You know, make sure you understand the risks there when you're working with these new technologies, and stay safe. And then we'd encourage you to engage us as guides. This is really a complicated time to be a manufacturer. Technology's moving quickly, markets are changing, and you really need someone who can help you sort through all of this and what's most important to your business. And the thing that we have going for us is that we have great expertise on our staff, and even beyond that, you know, we are hooked into the MEP national network. So we have resources across every state in the country, and we have friends across the state, so that if we can't get you the solution, we know somebody who can. And it's a time to where there are tremendous opportunities out there for people who are leaning into the future and saying, I really want to grow, and this is a chance for my company to really start blossoming. So thank you for the time. I'm going to ask Rob to come back up, and I will take all the easy questions. Rob will take all the hard questions. So, any questions? Please.
So you talked about, work environment being the number two thing with issue related to the workforce and recruiting and retaining the workforce. What does work environment entail? Because I'm with an architecture and engineering firm, so I think space. But that could be anything from culture and, feeling of belonging, all those things. Is it all wrapped into one, or did you define it?
We didn't go deep enough to get the real specifics, but generally in our experience and in the conversations with manufacturers that we had in the focus group, it is all of those things. It's, I come back to the employment brand. Why should someone work for you? And what concerns me in the survey results is when I see the numbers for small and medium manufacturers, their number one tool is salaries and benefits, wages. So I'm Bucks Bar and Grill and Metal Bending. I'm going to compete on wages with Harley Davidson or Johnson Controls. I think that's probably a losing battle and plays away from a smaller company's strengths, right? Which is to be able to be flexible, to be able to really tailor the culture or the environment to what the employees value and what gets you, the most productivity out of your operation, so. Other questions?
Yeah. Do you have any data with purchasing manufactured parts overseas compared to the US? We're seeing the biggest growth with companies bringing it back from overseas, willing to pay a higher cost because they learned from COVID that they can't have all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on that?
So data on parts being reshored to the US. We don't,
Making them in the US.
right, we don't have data on this. One of the things that we're working on is a supply chain council in the state where we're getting some good feedback on what manufacturers are seeing. And we're seeing that there's been a lot of effort to bring those parts back to the US. In a lot of cases, they're nearshored. Where labor is an issue, they're going to Mexico if they're coming back to North America. The other thing that we're seeing is that the willingness to pay a premium is starting to diminish. And as one of the members of the council says, our memories are very short. We've already begun to forget what happened during the pandemic, and it's moving more from the strategic folks and back into the purchasers. So manufacturers want their supply chain short. They want their suppliers here in the US, and they're not willing to pay much of a premium to do it right now. And there's a gentleman 2 seats to your left who can be a resource for you on that. So got great expertise on that. So, anything else? Please.
It seems like the consistency of employee attraction and retention has always been the number one variable, right? Why is there a decrease, do you think, in the willingness to invest in employee development, training, culture? And that's the biggest concern.
You just keep looking at me. Why? So the question was, why do we think there's a decrease in the willingness to invest in training? And so, I think that what it might be is that we've had a pretty high ramp up in those areas, and manufacturers are just mainly maintaining that level that they've had in the past. And I think they're getting smarter about what they do. I mean, it's like anything a manufacturer does, they're going to keep doing the things that are effective and stop doing the things that aren't. But what we're seeing is the folks that are at the leading edge of this, their issue with finding employees is so much lower than that 20% that we see struggling. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've gone into a manufacturer and said, hey, you know, how many employees would you hire if I could wave a magic wand? And they go, yeah, not many, because we have what we need and we're able to keep what we need. And talking to a manufacturer, you know, so what's your turnover? To one of these manufacturers, he goes, God, we had a really bad year, some employer of 160 people. He said, we lost 3 people last year. So, I mean, how many of us in this room would love to have that turnover number, and yet he's sweating bullets over it, so. Please.
Did you all get any regular data on the job titles, the roles with the greatest turnover, or the roles with the highest demand?
We did not get that specific. So we stayed at a fairly strategic level. The question was, did we get specific data on the roles that had the most turnover? So, no, we didn't. Yes?
Were there any significant differences between the Minnesota results and the Wisconsin results?
This you have to answer. Significant differences between the Wisconsin and the Minnesota data.
No, we don't know yet. Ask me in a month. We literally just finished that survey yesterday.
So were there differences from last year?
No, they were actually pretty similar. The percentage of manufacturers who were hiring was lower in Minnesota than it was in Wisconsin. I think that's been the case for the 3 years where we've done, at least the 2 years where we've done parallel surveys. But no, for the most part, they're pretty similar.
Other questions?
One more.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said that manufacturers may go away, but manufacturing isn't.
Yeah.
In your conversations with manufacturers, did they talk a lot about future acquisitions, or are these companies just going away and that's it?
The question is, we talked about manufacturers going away, but not manufacturing, and whether we had any data on acquisitions or how that was going to happen. I think it could happen with acquisitions. I think what you're going to see is a lot of consolidation and just natural insourcing of parts. I mean, the people, we're seeing a big divide between the companies that are adopting technology and those that aren't. You know, the companies that aren't are saying, you know, we'll do it next year, the typical manufacturer response. Those that get it and who make that first investment, double down. They see that return right away and they say, I want more. And so that's the divide that we're trying to make sure that we keep trying to close. And we've done that with some of the programs we've developed for manufacturers to make that first investment, you know, plan it. And then we've got a little bit of money that can help you get over that hump of the first investment. So that we're lowering the operational risk, we're lowering the financial risk now as well, so.
Piggybacking that a little bit, there was a high percentage that we're saying they're looking for new customers and new markets. Is that likely going to come from that acquisition, or are you seeing that there's more organic growth that's coming out of the manufacturers that you're talking about?
Yeah, the question was, where are we seeing the growth coming from, acquisitions or organic? This was more focused internally, so the people who answered this was more organic growth, and how could they find new customers? Anything else?
Do you all have breakdowns of the types of manufacturing, like the responses that you got? So for everything from automation to agriculture to all the subsets?
We have the breakouts of all the categories that you saw up on the board. We can do pretty well by industry. We can do pretty well by region. We just because I can't afford a census as opposed to a survey, it's really tough to do both. And you just have to be careful on the extrapolations you make, because the numbers can get pretty small in some of the industry sectors. Anything else? Well, I think we heard 3 calls to the bar, so I want to thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I really appreciate it. We're really proud of this output. If questions come to you after this, please let me know. My information's on the screen. The results have been posted on the website, so if you go to our website, you can get all of these slides, and we're happy to share any of the data that we have. So again, thank you very much.